engage with admirers and supporters across the border. Manto has kept his letters from these people, and one that I want to share with you particularly is by Amrita Pritham, who wrote to him, and he wrote back, and I mean, I don't have Manto's letter, but she's thanking, she sent him her famous novel Pinjar to read. Very appropriately. And Manto responded to her clearly, and she writes back, and it's wonderful that a writer of your merit takes an interest in my work. Manto may well have replied that there was no reason why he should not take an interest in her work. The batwara, the word he used for partition, may have divided lives and drawn lines of red in the hearts and minds of sections of the subcontinent's population, but those lines did not extend to the domain of literature, which could never be divided. The pity of partition was not that instead of one country, there were now two, independent India and Pakistan, but the fact that human beings in both countries were slaves, slaves of bigotry, slaves of religious passions, slaves of animal instincts and barbarity. Saad Hasan Manto died at 10:30 a.m. on 18th January 1955, after a stormy life lasting 42 years and 8 months and 4 days. He was declared out in Lahore during the morning session of the second Indo-Pakistan cricket test match being played in Bahawalpur. Manto had wanted to see Hanif Muhammad bat in the third test in Lahore. Unlike that slow and steady compiler of a triple century, Manto had played a gem of an innings with an array of spectacular shots before throwing away his wicket. What he lacked in the durability of life is more than made up, however, in the folios he has left behind. Pages not just of his short stories, but also plays, sketches, and from a historian's point of view, his largely unexplored and ignored essays. On his deathbed, he is said to have asked for a peg of whiskey, a spirit synonymous with death that he had embraced as his mortal enemy. He let his liver disintegrate by drinking in excess of the toxic local brew because it somehow connected him with the trials and tribulations of those whose lives were much more wretched than his. The tragedy of Manto's life is in many ways the tragedy of Pakistan, the country he reluctantly made his own, but for whose cultural and intellectual renewal he exerted and eventually sacrificed his life. Last slide. On 18th August 1954, Manto wrote his epitaph while obliging a stenographer with an autograph, starting with his mother's recommended use of the numeral 786, which stand for, I begin in the name of Allah, the compassionate, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Here lies Saad Hasan Manto. With him lie buried all the arts and mysteries of short story writing. Under tons of earth he lies wondering which of the two is the greater short story writer, God or he. The pity of Pakistan is that the epitaph does not appear on Manto's grave in the Mayani Sahib graveyard in Lahore, where he's buried, to avoid enraging the sentiments of those posturing as the face of religious orthodoxy in the Muslim nation state. His bereaved family, at the behest of his sister, instead used an alternative epitaph authored by Manto as well and inspired by a couplet from his most favorite poet, Ghalib. This is the grave of Saad Hasan Manto. Sorry, you're behind. Please, let's move on. That's the last one. Yes, okay. Grave of Saad Hasan Manto, who still thinks his name was not the repeated word on the tablet of time. It remains to be seen whether there will be less controversy if the epitaph simply read, "Here lies Manto, who is still wondering whether he is the greater storyteller of the past and retriever of memories than the historian." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jalal. I am just reminded of the plight of Muhammad Ali Jinnah's ADC, who was told to tell Mountbatten to go home. I had to cut the session short, and but I think all hands to Dr. Aisha Jalal. And if you objected to my calling her the greatest historian of Pakistan, and if you are thinking of me, I must disagree with you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aisha and Dr. Kazmi. We're going to have a very quick Q&A session. The audience, please, can you remain seated until the session is over? Thank you, and let's have our questions, please.
Speech, but I just want to ask one thing, Aisha Jalal. You talk about the partition, so where were the partition actually in this speech? What impact of Mantos on partition, and what is the impact of partition on Mantos? where was, I think, it was missing.
Well, I mean, you can't get everything in a 55-minute talk, but I'm talking about a moment of historical rupture to which Manto is reacting, how it affected his life, how it affected the stories he wrote. What more do you want? You want me to give you the politics of partition? I wrote about it 30 years ago. Next question.
Seated until our speakers have left the hall. There will be no book signings inside the hall. If you want to get your book signed, please go to the author signing booth. Please remain seated until our speakers leave the hall.